Legal disclaimer. This video is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. Laws vary by location, and everyone's situation is different. When considering any legal agreement, always consult with a qualified attorney who can provide guidance based on your specific circumstances. With that said, let's dive into prenuptial agreements and explore the most effective way to eliminate anxiety and prevent unnecessary strain on your relationship when discussing one with your future spouse. Now, you know having a prenup agreement before marriage is smart, but the second you bring it up, it's like you just accused your partner of being a gold digger. She gets defensive. You feel guilty. And suddenly, what should be a rational discussion turns into an emotional battle that could jeopardize your relationship. But what if I told you the problem isn't the prenup itself, it's how it's crafted and framed? In this video, I'm going to show you a strategy to reframe the prenup conversation in a way that strengthens your relationship instead of tearing it down. Because what and how you present makes all the difference. So, let's first talk a bit about reframing. Reframing is the art of shifting how people perceive something, particularly from a win-lose perspective to a win-win. Take car sales, for example. Not everyone wants to buy a used car. To some, it sounds risky, unreliable, maybe even cheap, a potential win-lose situation for the buyer. But reframe it as a certified pre-owned vehicle. And now it sounds like a semi-premium product that's been inspected and guaranteed to be high quality, a win-win for both buyer and seller. Or take politics. No one likes tax increases, but if you call it an investment in the future, people start supporting it because now they see a win-win. And here's the deal. We've been framing prenups the wrong way. Right now, they trigger thoughts of divorce, distrust, and worst-case scenarios from your partner's perspective, a definite win-lose for them. But if we shift the focus to commitment, longevity, and security, everything changes. Suddenly, they see it as a win-win, instantly transforming a prenuptial agreement into what I call a covenant agreement. Now, this isn't just a name change, it's a shift in philosophy. It tells your partner, this agreement isn't about planning an easy exit or hoarding assets. It's about ensuring we're fully committed and will do everything possible to keep our relationship strong before ever considering divorce. So now that we understand why reframing a prenup agreement is important, the next step is understanding how to transform it into a covenant agreement, a win-win for both you and your future spouse. But before we get into the details, let's take a quick moment to understand why we're using the term covenant agreement in the first place. The term covenant agreement is inspired by covenant marriage, a legally recognized form of marriage in the states of Louisiana, Arizona, and Arkansas that enforces stricter divorce requirements. While no-fault divorce is still available in these states, they impose additional conditions, such as mandatory separation periods and counseling, making the process more difficult. Fault-based divorces, however, may be granted under serious conditions like adultery, abuse, or abandonment, which can expedite the process. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the covenant agreement in more detail. Remember, none of this is legal advice. What's being presented here is a strategy that you should discuss with a licensed attorney in your area who has experience in family law. Also, it's important to understand that the term covenant agreement is not a separate legal classification. It's simply a way to describe a prenuptial agreement that includes additional elements focused on commitment and reconciliation. The name itself does not carry any special legal weight. Rather, it serves as a conversation tool to help frame the agreement in a way that aligns with commitment and long-term stability rather than separation planning. That being said, there are 3 elements that can be added to a typical prenuptial agreement to transform it into a covenant agreement. 1. A preamble. 2. Defined grounds for divorce. And 3. A couple reconciliation plan. Let's take a closer look at each one. Let's start with the first element on our list, the preamble. This section of the agreement sets the tone and provides context for everything that follows. Think of it as the mission statement of the contract. You explain why you are crafting this agreement. your motivations, your best-case scenarios, and even your worst-case concerns. It allows both parties to clearly define their intentions and establish the guiding principles of their marriage. A well-written preamble doesn't just state legal terms, it tells a story. It outlines the couple's shared commitment, values, and long-term vision for their relationship. Additionally, you can express your concerns about no-fault divorce and emphasize that this agreement is a way to break from that norm, reinforcing the belief that marriage should be a serious, lifelong commitment. All of this is important because, in the event of a legal dispute, courts often refer to the preamble to interpret the original intent of the agreement. Second on our list is defined grounds for divorce. This is pretty straightforward. You're identifying the actions that would justify divorce in your marriage. But equally important, your covenant agreement shouldn't just define violations, it should also establish clear outcomes. Each action you list should connect to its own penalty provision, which would be detailed later in the document. In a typical prenuptial agreement, a penalty provision might take the form of an infidelity clause, a conduct clause, or a behavioral clause, each designed to hold both partners accountable. With guidance from an attorney, a penalty provision can outline how restitution to the wronged party will be handled, specific to that particular ground for divorce. For example, some agreements might include a provision stating that if Party A commits adultery, Party B will receive additional financial compensation or a larger share of marital assets. These terms would be spelled out in a penalty provision, crafted by you and your attorney to fit your specific situation. Of course, not all penalty provisions are automatically enforceable. Courts vary in how they interpret punitive clauses related to divorce, especially in states where no-fault divorce laws are in effect. Still, working with your attorney to include a penalty provision for each defined ground for divorce can serve as a powerful statement of intent and add a level of accountability within your agreement. Additionally, it gives the agreement clarity and specificity in how it would be applied, which can serve as a strong talking point when presenting your covenant agreement. Clearly defined outcomes, tied to accountability, can help address concerns your partner may have about a prenup being too open-ended or feeling like a blank check for you to take advantage of them. Now, a little legal background about no-fault divorce and how it ties into everything. Before 1969, U.S. divorce laws required proof of wrongdoing, typically adultery, abuse, or abandonment, to grant a divorce. But today, no-fault divorce laws take precedence, even in states that recognize covenant marriage. In these states, divorce can't be prohibited entirely, but their laws may impose delays and conditions before a divorce is finalized. The point is, because no-fault divorce laws exist in most states, it's important to understand that any terms in your agreement that attempt to be punitive or to prohibit divorce may not be enforceable in court today. However, voluntary restrictions that you and your partner mutually agree to can still serve as a powerful statement of intent, reinforcing the values and commitment outlined in your preamble. And while courts may not be required to enforce specific conditions or penalty provisions, these terms can still influence how a judge interprets the agreement's overall purpose and intent. Finally, because divorce laws can change, including well-crafted clauses like these helps ensure your covenant agreement remains aligned with future legal developments, making it as relevant and future-proof as possible within evolving legal standards. Lastly, let's talk about the couple reconciliation plan. This element of your agreement walks the reader through how you and your spouse plan to navigate marital challenges. Whether it's a serious act that would justify divorce or simply the natural lulls that can happen in a relationship, this section outlines a structured approach to resolving conflict. For example, you and your spouse may agree that if you hit a rough patch and one or both of you are unhappy, you will commit to at least X number of days of marriage counseling before any legal action is taken. Or you may establish a separation period to assess your feelings and goals, or to simply cool off if one partner has done something deeply hurtful. The point is, this section of the agreement outlines the proactive steps you and your spouse are willing to take before considering divorce, a last attempt to reconcile and preserve the relationship. However, just like the defined grounds for divorce, this section may not carry legal weight in court and could instead be viewed as an extension of your preamble, reinforcing the agreement's intent and guiding principles. Okay, so now let's do a recap of how all of this works in our reframing strategy to create a win-win proposition for both you and your potential spouse. As stated, we've taken a typical prenup agreement and worked with our attorney to add, at minimum, a preamble, defined grounds for divorce, and a couple reconciliation plan. Although these additions may not be legally binding in court, their presence in the agreement serves as a clear statement of intent. While family law courts are not required to uphold all of your agreed-upon provisions, having these elements in your agreement may provide additional context if a judge chooses to consider the intent behind the agreement. And don't worry, this approach isn't uncommon. Contracts in various fields often include provisions that, while not always legally binding, help clarify intent and influence judicial interpretation. Including these provisions in your covenant agreement follows the same logic. While a judge may not be required to enforce them, they help establish clear expectations and demonstrate commitment. However, beyond the legal positioning, what truly makes your covenant agreement a win-win is that it provides you with strong talking points when presenting it to your future spouse. Instead of awkwardly opening up the discussion with,
So, I have this prenup agreement, and I'd like you to sign it before the wedding.
now compare that to saying,
Listen, I love you, so much so that I want to put our commitment in writing to ensure we have a strong foundation for our marriage.
see the power of reframing? Instead of presenting a cold, impersonal legal document that hints at doom and gloom, you now have an agreement designed to reinforce trust, commitment, and shared values. Picture this, you and your fiancé reading through your covenant agreement together. First, the preamble, affirming your commitment. Then, the defined grounds for divorce, establishing clear boundaries for issues like adultery or abuse. Followed by the couple reconciliation plan, reinforcing your shared effort to make things work. And finally, when you get to the part about dividing assets and handling financial matters, the discussion should no longer feel tense or emotionally charged with negativity. Instead, it becomes a rational conversation about the logical conclusion of the relationship only after all attempts to stay together have failed. Okay, now let's wrap this video up with a few questions some people may have.
Question number 1. Is this strategy meant to trick my fiancé into signing a prenuptial agreement?
No, not at all. This strategy is not about deception. It's about removing the negativity and stigma that often surround prenuptial agreements. Many people react emotionally to the idea of a prenup because it's often framed as planning for failure rather than reinforcing commitment. This strategy reframes the conversation so that both partners can approach it rationally as a way to protect the marriage, set expectations, and create a foundation for long-term success. Rather than leading with a legal contract that triggers fear and distrust, you are presenting a shared commitment, one that includes safeguards for both partners, an agreement to work through challenges, and clear expectations if the marriage ever faces difficulties. The goal isn't to trick your fiancé. It's to ensure the conversation is productive, respectful, and focused on commitment rather than fear.
Question number 2. Can I draft my covenant agreement myself?
Unless you are an attorney, I strongly discourage it. Anyone seeking to draft a legally binding prenuptial agreement should always consult a licensed attorney in their state or jurisdiction. Discuss your strategy with an attorney and work with them to craft an agreement that meets your objectives while staying within legal bounds. Many self-appointed DIY attorneys have had their prenups thrown out in court because they cut corners trying to save a few bucks. In the end, they lost far more on the back end than they saved on the front end. Just ask Steven Spielberg, who reportedly lost $100 million because his prenuptial agreement was scribbled on a napkin and didn't hold up in court.
Question number 3. What is the best way to present a covenant agreement to my fiancé?
Since you're thinking about taking the next step into marriage, you likely have a good understanding of your partner's personality, their likes, dislikes, and what might trigger positive or negative reactions. That being said, Here are a few approaches you can tailor to your specific partner when introducing a covenant agreement. First, let's talk about the document itself. One major factor that often contributes to a negative reaction to a prenuptial agreement is the way the physical document is presented. Most of the time, it's a cold stack of papers filled with legal jargon, reinforcing a sense of a business transaction rather than a heartfelt discussion between two people who love each other. This means taking the time to present the document in a non-transactional way could help reduce your partner's anxiety. For example, consider including a stylized cover letter or a handwritten note with your covenant agreement. Your message to your fiancé could be a summary of your preamble, reinforcing the intent behind the agreement, or a heartfelt explanation of why you want to put your commitment in writing, not as a legal loophole, but as a promise to hold yourself and your partner accountable to each other. The point is, the way you present the document should frame you as a loving partner, not as an opposing party. Now, aside from the document, let's focus on how you start the conversation with your fiancé. Discussing a prenuptial agreement doesn't just cause anxiety for the person receiving it, it can also be stressful for the one presenting it. No one wants to feel like the villain in their relationship, and that's a common fear for those who want a prenup in place before their wedding. But remember, the goal of using a covenant agreement isn't just to reframe the prenup document, it's also to reframe the discussion around it. This means that, depending on your personality and your partner's, there are several ways to start the conversation that can help ease any initial anxiety. You can begin by focusing on one of these three themes. 1. Love and long-term commitment, emphasizing trust, security, and future planning. 2. Having a higher standard of marriage, emphasizing the sacredness of marriage vows and a commitment to accountability, unlike no-fault divorce, which makes ending a marriage too easy. And 3, commitment backed by accountability, demonstrating that marriage isn't just about promises, it's about responsibility. The agreement establishes clear grounds for divorce, ensuring that actions have consequences for those who fail to uphold their vows. Let's look at examples of each of these themes in practice. So let's say you are more aligned with the theme love and long-term commitment. You might open the discussion with your fiancé like this.
I love you, and I want to build a future with you that feels secure for both of us. This document is a covenant agreement, and it's not about expecting failure. It's about making sure we're aligned in our goals, our responsibilities, and our long-term commitment to each other. It ensures that no matter what happens, we both feel protected and valued.
Alternatively, if you feel focusing on having a higher standard of marriage is a better fit for you and your partner, you could begin your dialogue with,
For me, marriage vows are sacred, and I don't take them lightly. Too often, people see marriage as something disposable because no-fault divorce makes leaving so easy. This covenant agreement is my way of showing you that I take our vows seriously. I want us both to hold ourselves to a higher standard. This isn't just paperwork. It's a way for us to reinforce that our promises to each other actually mean something.
Lastly, if you believe the theme of commitment backed by accountability lines up better with your relationship, you could start your conversation with,
I believe marriage isn't just about love, it's about accountability. If we're making a lifelong commitment, it only makes sense that we also define what that means in practice. This covenant agreement ensures that we both take responsibility for honoring our vows and that there are clear and fair consequences if one of us doesn't. I see this as a way to strengthen our marriage, not weaken it.
Finally, regardless of how you start your conversation about the covenant agreement, always make it clear that it is not a one-sided document. It's something you both have a say in. If there are concerns, be open to discussions and possible revisions that ensure fairness for both you and your fiancé.
Question number 4. If my fiancé refuses to sign a covenant agreement, what should I do?
If your fiancé is completely against signing any type of agreement, it's important to take the time to understand why. Instead of forcing the issue, have an open and honest conversation about their concerns. Some people assume that signing a prenuptial agreement means planning for failure, which is exactly why reframing the conversation around a covenant agreement is so important. If she's open to discussing it, Explain that this isn't just about protecting assets. It's about establishing commitment, defining expectations, and ensuring fairness for both partners. Emphasize the defined grounds for divorce and the specificity of restitution for the wronged party, showing that a covenant agreement isn't merely a tool for separation, but rather a framework that holds both of you accountable to honoring your vows, with consequences if one party breaks that trust. If she's still unwilling to sign the covenant agreement after careful discussion and reiteration of its intent, along with the accountability and fairness it creates for both of you during the marriage, then it may be worth reassessing your compatibility when it comes to long-term financial and marital expectations.
Question number 5. Can a covenant agreement be signed after marriage?
Yes. While prenuptial agreements must be signed before marriage, you can create a postnuptial agreement after marriage that serves a similar function. A postnuptial agreement can incorporate the same elements as a covenant agreement, including a preamble, defined grounds for divorce, and a couple reconciliation plan. However, postnuptial agreements can sometimes be more difficult to enforce depending on state laws, so consulting an attorney is especially important if you are considering this route.
Question number 6. What if my attorney refuses to draft a covenant agreement?
Some attorneys may be unfamiliar with this approach or hesitant to draft non-standard provisions in a marital contract. If you encounter pushback, don't immediately dismiss the idea. Instead, ask the attorney what aspects concern them and see if modifications can be made. However, if your attorney refuses to include key provisions that are important to you, consider seeking a second opinion from another attorney who specializes in family law and contract drafting. All right, that wraps up our quick Q&A. If you found this video helpful, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need it. So, what do you think? Is reframing a good strategy when presenting a prenup? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember, don't go it alone just to save a few bucks. Always seek out an attorney when drafting legal agreements. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.